Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone. Meet with me again, Dewi Nuraini. Now I would like to give you the presentation about midterm test for contrastive and error analysis, defining error. Measures of deviance. Learners' ignorance of TL can be expressed in terms of four categories. The first one is grammaticality. The second one is acceptability. The third one is correctness. And the last one, or the fourth, is the strangeness and infelicity. First, grammaticality. This is synonymous with well-formedness. It is the grammar, not you or I, who decides whether something said by a learner is grammatical. The main problem with using grammaticality as a reference point is that different grammars will register different decisions concerning borderline cases. On the clear-cut cases, there will be no such inconsistencies. Next, acceptability. When non-linguistic factors militate against the use of a form, we attribute this to unacceptability. While it is the knower or NS of a language who decides whether an utterance is grammatical, it is the user who decides whether it is acceptable. For some, there can be no acceptability without grammaticality. In other words, grammaticality is a prerequisite for acceptability. An acceptable utterance is one that has been or might be produced by a native speaker in some appropriate context and is or would be accepted by other native speakers as belonging to the language in question. Lyons in 1977 offers a discussion of the degree to which grammaticality determines acceptability. It would be reasonable to assume that the notions of grammaticality and acceptability cross-classify, giving four possible combinations. The first one. There are sentences that are grammatical and acceptable correct. Most of the sentences in this book, even a book about errors, are of this type. The second, there are sentences that are both ungrammatical and unacceptable. Indeed, they are unacceptable precisely because of their ungrammaticality, since ungrammaticality is one of several grounds for unacceptability. EA is concerned principally with this category. The third, there are sentences that are grammatical and unacceptable. Borsley in 1991 gives the horse raced past the barn fell as an example of this type, arguing that despite its grammaticality, it leads the perceptual mechanism astray. Indeed, it leads the reader up to the garden path, and is consequently unacceptable. By contrast, the horse ridden past the barn fell is of type 1, being both grammatical and acceptable, since it does not mislead the reader. And number 4. Finally, there is the fourth pairing. Sentences that are ungrammatical but acceptable. This type ought to be impossible if it is indeed the case that ungrammaticality is one of the grounds for unacceptability, or what Lyons calls grammatical unacceptability. People say this and do not object to others saying it, despite its breaking the grammar rule that cannot generally combine with a prenominal adjective. A not gray sky that not rich man are clearly ill-formed, and as is normal, thereby also unacceptable. Next, correctness. The term reserved for referring to such recourse to prescriptive normative standards is correctness. An utterance can be accepted spontaneously and used with conviction by the NS. It is thus acceptable. For example, the grammatical "they went with Tom and me" is edited and replaced by "with Tom and I." This is a case of acceptability being overruled by correctness. Strangeness and infelicity. A type of strangeness not catered for by Allerton is that resulting from switching parts of speech, verb-ing nouns for instance. Former United States Secretary of State Alexander Haig is parodied for his penchant for this sort of language in the following. Haig, in congressional hearings before his confirmatory, paradoxed his auditioners by abnormaling his response so that verbs were nouned, nouns verbed, and adjectives adverbized. He techniqued a new way to vocabulary his thoughts so as to informationally uncertain anybody listening about what he had actually implicationed. What Haig is doing, they concept, is to decouple the Russians from everything they are molded to. The point about this example is that it would have different status and a different level of acceptability as produced by a native speaker, General Haig, from its status, if produced by a learner. From Haig, just the same as the poet's collocation, it is strangeness, while from the learner it would be viewed as ungrammaticality. Other dimensions, errors and mistakes. We are now in a position where we can begin to construct a definition of error. Intentionality plays a decisive role in this definition. An error arises only when there was no intention to commit one. One cannot spot so-called deliberate errors because they do not exist. Error. Mistake and acquisition, learning and acquisition. It is illuminating at least to inquire about the extent to which the error or mistake dichotomy cross-associates with Crescents in 1982, acquisition or learning distinction. There are four possible states of knowing. The first one is unacquired and unlearned. The second one is acquired but unlearned. Next, unacquired but learned. And the last, acquired and learned. Lapsology. The study of slips or lapsology has been until recently wholly directed to native speaker slips and has been the research preserve of psychologists interested in how language is stored and processed in the brains of normal people and the clinical consequences when these mechanisms go wrong. Mackay, in 1992, identifies what he calls the three puzzles in connection with slips. The first one is awareness puzzle. It asks how the speaker managed to make fine context-sensitive adjustments unconsciously. The second is practice puzzle. Why is there a higher incidence of slips on the most thoroughly practiced level of language, the phonology, and fewer slips on the least practiced, the grammar? One would expect the opposite. And the last one is detection puzzle. Ask why it is that we are most able to perceive slips on the level of language or pronunciation we are the least aware of. It would be interesting to compare natives and learners' slips. A first question is whether FL learners' slips conform to Language 1 or to TL constraints, or whether this depends on the proficiency level of the learners, that is, their degree of near nativeness. A second question would be whether the characteristics of FL learners' lexical substitutions resemble those of natives' malapropisms as outlined by Fay and Cutler. Alhamdulillah, that's all for my presentation about defining error. I'm really sorry for any mistakes that I've made. Thank you for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you on my next video. Bye bye.